Okay, so when we look at Hag-Seed, so first box, Felix was previously fired from his job as artistic director of the Makashaweg Festival, not sure how you meant to pronounce that, but by Tony and Sal in Canada after the loss of his daughter Miranda, who he wants to resurrect through the Tempest. So first of all, what tense is this written in? When we're learning about this in the novel, how is this written when we're learning about how he got fired? It's in the past tense and it's facilitated through a series of what? It's basically like flashbacks, right? We get these episodes, we get these flashbacks. Important that everyone understands this. We're getting these flashbacks of Felix and of when he was fired as an artistic director, okay? Notice here how he was a literal director. Does everyone see that? Prospero was a figurative / metaphorical director, so you can note that in. Felix is a literal director. So this is called realism. So the novel is realist. Realism connects to this idea that Atwood translates or transforms the metaphorical into a literal world. Okay, so she's making everything super literal, whereas in the play, it was figurative and metaphorical. It is basically mirroring that dialogic process of revelation. So a dialogic process of revelation in the play where Prospero reveals the backstory of his betrayal to Miranda. So Felix's story facilitated through flashbacks, it's far more in depth, right? It's far more psychological because it's written in third person limited. So it's still written in third person. It's not Felix speaking, but it's someone speaking as if they were in the mind of Felix, right? So there still is that bias playing into it, just like how Prospero controls the story through his dialogue to Miranda. There's a similarity, right? But the difference, right? The difference is facilitated through the prose fiction form, the fact that the story is fleshed out. Does that make sense to everyone? There's far more context to it. So actually it's the prose fiction form itself that's allowing for a greater contextualization of Felix's past. So the prose fiction form, because we're in the storytelling mode, we're not in the performance mode. Remember, when you are reading or watching a play, you're restricted to dialogue. So it's kind of limited in that way. But now, through prose fiction, we can actually tell the story in more detail. So we're actually providing greater context to Felix's past. Instead of just mentioning similes, metaphors, things like that, you should be linking those with these broader features, such as flashbacks, third-person limited narration. In The Tempest, there's something called magic realism, but that's not realism, it's magic realism, right? Because it has those supernatural elements in it. Okay, so there's the contrast in the form there. But what's the effect of providing that greater context to Felix's background? And also, what's the effect of reimagining the backstory so that Miranda, his daughter, has actually died and that he's grieving? So that greater context actually makes it easier, right? It makes it easier for the reader to empathize, or as you said, you could say sympathize or empathize with Felix's struggle, okay? So that reimagining of the plot, but also that change in the form. Does everyone see how it always comes down to those two things? You either reimagine something in the narrative, i.e. the loss of Miranda, his daughter, or you change the way you represent something. And Atwood does both. And Atwood does both here because now it's realism, but also it's flashbacks. It's also prose fiction, which means, as we said, prose is like conversational English. So she can actually write out in more detail the background, so we have a greater empathy towards the situation versus just hearing it through a biased dialogue. So there's this humanization of Felix's perspective through all of the things I just mentioned. Instead of Felix being tied up in this feudal context, so we're no longer in a feudal context, that's why he's now a literal director, and he comes into, he basically is in the context of a ministerial, remember it's democratic context now. So Sal is like the minister, Tony is his colleague. It's a more professional context. It's not actually to do with a feudal system where there's kings and princes. Does everyone see that clearly? But in both cases, Prospero and Felix were neglecting their duties. Or at least they believe they were neglecting their duties. Now let's talk about that. Prospero neglected his duty as Duke because he preferred to learn magic. Yeah, so does everyone remember at the start of Hag-Seed, or if you don't, this is basically what's happened, or what is referred to, is Felix, after he loses his daughter, he blames himself for the loss of his daughter, so he believes he's neglected his duty as her father. That's the first thing. And the second thing is he's neglected potentially his duty as the director in providing an accessible performance. So he's putting on these crazy performances because he's so engaged with the art, with the performative art, right? That he actually loses touch with what the audience wants. So does everyone see? So Felix, just like Prospero got distracted with magic, Felix gets distracted with the art of performing itself. Does everyone see the meta aspect there? Prospero is obsessed with the art of magic. Felix is obsessed with the art of performance. So he's obsessed with the art of performance, but he doesn't take care of the logistics of the role. So he's an artistic director, but he's not very good at every part of the job except coming up with these crazy performances because that's what he likes to do. He puts his personal ambitions ahead of what's good for the greater collective. And that's the same as what Prospero did. Here's the extra personal element. He blames himself for neglecting his daughter, right? And he basically is grieving that loss and blaming himself. So there's that self-blame.